How did we get here? Over 65 million murdered unborn children in America since 1973. Gender-confused adolescents mutilating themselves at the applause of our federal government. Pro-life sidewalk counselors being arrested. Parents who speak at school board meetings being labeled domestic terrorists by the federal government. We're all asking the same question right now, aren't we? How did we get here? What bred this culture of death that is targeting my children and my family? What happened to the Christendom that I knew and the robust family culture in America? The answer is that things happen gradually, then suddenly. The disciples of the New York Times 1619 Project and our journalistic and cultural betters would have you believe that the systemic ills that we're experiencing now in America are the result of racist colonizers from 1619 that brought the first slaves to American shores. You see, ideas have consequences, and bad ideas have victims. The culture of death that we're in today is not coincidental. It's not an accident. It was intentionally created by a set of Marxist, socialist, totalitarian revolutionaries who were engaging in a proxy war attack against Christianity and the American family here in the States. To understand where we're going and where we're at today in this culture of death, we have to understand where we've come from. We need to look at the patron saint of feminism, whose legacy is far greater and her influence on our culture of death far more wicked than any other revolutionary that spawned out of the early 1900s. She's the founder of the American Birth Control League, which you know today as Planned Parenthood. Her name is Margaret Sanger, and you've been lied to about her.
I hope a lot of people are shocked at where we are in the culture. Something insane is happening. Madness has been unleashed in our culture. How did this happen? How did this happen so suddenly? Well, the answer is it didn't happen so suddenly. It takes a long time to go from a few intellectuals believing some bad ideas to bringing those ideas into the culture more and more and more until they bear fruit. The parallels to how Germany got to where it was in the rise of the Nazis to where we are now is extremely dramatic. It's unavoidable. The excuses church leaders gave for their silence in the 30s are precisely the same excuses many church leaders are giving today. God expects his church to be the conscience of the state. He expects believers to stand against the madness. So if believers can be lulled into a sense of complacency or into a sense of fatalism, there's nothing I can do, we've abdicated that role, and that is exactly how we got where we are now.
Why is it all of a sudden our school boards are sexually charged to confuse children? And why is our culture, even our doctors, are going against parental rights and mutilating children? What in the world is going on? Satan always goes after the young, always the young, and it's the battle for the soul of not just America, this is the battle for the soul of the world. Abortion is the #1 abomination to Almighty God. I think he's made that crystal clear. Go and study the actions of the ancient deities and what they required. This is ancient stuff. Solomon said there's nothing new under the sun, and what we're seeing today is exactly what the Bible foretold. He warned Israel over and over again. He would forgive a lot of stuff, but he said, forbid not, never allow your child to pass through the fire as an offering to Moloch or Remphan, the pagan gods of the ancient world. Now, we know as believers that those are demons. But God says, you have covered my land in blood, you have sacrificed your sons and daughters, and for that I will hold you accountable.
The greatness of a nation is not its navy and army and economy, it's how it treats its most vulnerable. Leviticus 20 says if any Israelite or foreigner living in Israel sacrifices a child to Molech, that person should be put to death. If any member of the community closes their eyes when that man sacrifices his child to Molech, I myself, the Lord, will set my face against him and his family and will cut them off from Israel.
Isaiah 5:20 tells us, woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness. We're in a day where evil is now being called good. Truth has been turned on its head. The left does a good job of making things that are evil sound good. Instead of saying that you're killing your baby, we say simple things like, you know, a mom deserves the right to have choice. Choice to do what? Choice to murder.
Admire Margaret Sanger enormously. Her courage, her tenacity, her vision.
Critical work that Planned Parenthood does on behalf of America's women every day.
It's been nearly 100 years since the first health clinic of what later would become Planned Parenthood opened its doors to women in Brooklyn.
What Christians often don't understand in the culture wars and in the fight for life is that abortion is not just one issue among many. Abortion is almost the linchpin upon which the liberal establishment swings. But what happens when you pull out a linchpin? The door falls off. And so when Roe v. Wade gets overturned and that linchpin starts getting lifted off, the liberal establishment lost their minds because they're treating it like a religious sacrament.
When Mrs. Margaret Sanger opened the first birth control clinic in the United States back in 1916, birth control was a dirty word.
I think the greatest sin in the world is bringing children into the world that have disease from their parents, that have no chance in the world to be a human being, practically. Delinquents, prisoners, all sorts of things just marked when they're born. That, to me, is the greatest sin that people can commit.
Behind me is the Planned Parenthood of Greater New York building, a building which up until mid-2020 bore the name the Margaret Sanger Center, which sat on the corner of a street called the Margaret Sanger Square. Something happened in 2020 during the mostly peaceful, somewhat fiery BLM Incorporated Antifa arson protests, where the left went after their own. You know this about revolutions, right? They always eat their own. And so the left uncovered and actually exposed what conservatives had been saying for decades. And Margaret Sanger was a racist, eugenicist, totalitarian revolutionary who hated anyone that she said had bad genes and was unfit to reproduce. So Planned Parenthood removed their founder's name from this building and from the Margaret Sanger Square. To understand Margaret Sanger, we have to understand the early cultural and political revolutionaries who influenced her. Revolutionaries who had a far more robust commitment to their philosophy and religion than most Christians have today. If they've lied to you about their patron saint, what else are they lying about? My mother was the director of a pregnancy resource center in the early 1990s in Los Angeles County, and she was directing that center while pregnant with me. So it's been a part of our sort of family heritage for a long time, and kind of became my own in high school when I saw mutilated, aborted baby photos of first trimester children at the stage of development that there's the most public support for abortion, and at the stage of development that the culture's largely told is just an insensate blob of tissue mass at that point. And at 18 years old, I was looking at hands, feet, legs, ears, eyeballs, lips of dismembered and dissected children in the first trimester. And that was a turning point for me. Planned Parenthood wants you to accept their admission that renaming a building and removing a street sign will make all their bad things go away. But we're not going to let them get away with it that easily. We're going to expose and discover who the real Margaret Sanger was and how her intentional attack and assault against the family in America explains our current culture of death and upside down world that we're living in today. And to expose and discover who this real woman was, I'm going to visit my trusted friend and advisor, Dr. George Brandt, a worldwide expert on the patron saint of feminism.
I was speaking at an educational conference in Kansas City, Missouri, and a group of pro-life friends there invited me to come to their Saturday morning sidewalk counseling and prayer time. They believed that this particular Planned Parenthood clinic disposed of all medical waste in a dumpster behind the building. So I decided to go see. And what I did find was a bundle. As I peeled back the layers of gauze, I realized that I was holding a child, looking into unseeing eyes, this beautiful child. It was an astonishing moment where every form of violence and opposition to what is right and good and true was right there before my eyes. It was such a clear indication of what was at stake that I determined that I had to write the book, Grand Illusions. That became the opening chapter, that sequence. To this day, that moment haunts my every waking moment. Although it was horrific, I would never take it back, because once and for all, I saw clearly what is at stake here. So I have plenty of emotions around this issue, but I want those emotions to be informed. I want those emotions to be shaped by what is right and good and true. There are a lot of people who get involved in the pro-life movement out of sentiment. And sentiment is good, but sentiment has to be shaped. It has to be discipled. It has to be formed. It has to be informed. Part of the reason that I've taken the historical, biblical, and scholarly approach to a lot of these issues is we have to attack this leviathan, not just leaf and branch, but trunk and root. And the only way that we can do that is if we know our stuff. We need to study the past, not just to understand what happened then, but to understand what's happening now.
We need to understand that Planned Parenthood is one of the largest, best funded, and most profitable 501c3s in human history. They're the second largest provider of cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers.
Their fastest growing revenue stream now is trans drugs for teens.
And they are behind all of the kooky pornographic sex ed, gender theory, and comprehensive sexuality education in America's public schools. We are now going to put the puzzle pieces together of the Leviathan, if you will.
Every radical revolution from the French Revolution, the radical Jacobins, the revolutions of 1848, they all failed. But Margaret Sanger understood if you can change the culture, you can usher in the revolution. And she has.
So let's start putting the pieces together here. To understand the culture of death in America, where should we begin here, and how do we start tracing the revolutionaries whose hate and ideologies turned Sanger into the woman that she was?
I think a good place to start is with Thomas Malthus.
Okay.
Malthus was an English clergyman who became concerned, thinking that population grows exponentially, but natural resources grow arithmetically, which in his mind meant that there was a population bomb about to occur. And so he came up with this vision of eliminating unwanted aspects of the population.
Because eventually population growth will outstrip our ability to provide food
Exactly.
for those people.
So if we start with Thomas Malthus, we can immediately move to Charles Darwin, who read Malthus's work and began to think about the origin of species.
His book.
His book. And it's what drove his expedition on the Beagle. And there was one man who was particularly taken with the idea. It was his half-cousin, Francis Galton, who took the ideas of Darwin and then took them one step further. If we need to ensure the ascent of the good and the descent of the bad, then let's apply that to human populations. He's the father of eugenics.
So you're saying we moved awfully quickly from survival of the fittest to his cousin, Galton, let's say...
the elimination of the unfit.
Let's say might makes
right.
Yep. So we moved awfully quickly from the premise man is an animal, so it's an animal kingdom, so the strong will survive and the weak will die, to the premise the strong must kill the weak.
This then leads to a whole question about what is sex for? If it's not for reproduction, first and foremost, what is it for?
Right.
That brings us to Havelock Ellis. He becomes a sexual theorist who develops this notion that the first and most important aspect of sexuality is not human reproduction, but rather it's the exploration of what he called the innate soul.
Don't we have evidence of letters between Galton and Havelock Ellis?
Yes.
Where Ellis tells Galton that he will do his best to push forward the eugenic theory in his writings.
And he does. One of the things about Havelock Ellis was he was quite the evangelist. He believed that it was his mission not just to explore these things and to write about these things, but to begin to mentor young men and women to take this to the ends of the earth.
Wow.
It was the Great Commission flipped upside down.
That's right.
The whole purpose behind this is to overturn Western civilization.
That's right.
No gods, no masters. By this time, Marxism has been discredited as a political movement. But the notion behind Marxism of replacing the old Christendom with something fresh and new is very much alive. Now, instead of economics and politics, it's being driven by human sexuality, morality, the transformation of the family. So Havelock Ellis writes and begins to influence all of these radicals after the turn of the century. People like Emma Goldman, a famous anarchist. So Emma Goldman founds the Mother Earth magazine. And so she becomes very influential because she comes to the US and begins to mentor a whole group of Greenwich Village radicals. Because a part of the vision is if you're going to change the culture, you've got to approach it culturally.
It was here in Greenwich Village, New York, in the early 1900s, about between 1912 and 1914, that Margaret Sanger and a group of revolutionary leftists would gather in an apartment about 2 blocks from here to host speakers, to discuss leftist revolutionary tactics, to host actual anarchists and communists and members of the Socialist Party and the New York labor movements. Margaret Sanger would gather here with her friends Emma Goldman, an open socialist and anarchist, Bill Haywood, a communist and a member of the Communist Party and the New York labor movement here in America, and actually the co-founder of the ACLU as well, Roger Baldwin. Are you starting to sense some of the cohesion and integration that was happening between the secular moral revolutionaries and how they were carefully planning the culture of death that we're now seeing unfold before us in the 21st century. So much of what is plaguing the American family, our children, and the social fabric in America today happened and started here in Greenwich Village, New York.
Margaret Sanger is radicalized. So she starts to write and create pamphlets that run afoul of the Postmaster General's anti-obscenity laws to protect the male.
What gets her indicted is some of her writing in Sanger's first magazine,
Yes,
Woman Rebel,
right.
that bore the mast, no gods
No masters.
and no masters. And in
And the subtitle was To Create a Race of Thoroughbreds,
wow.
which gets her arrested. So she flees to England. So there in England, she begins to formulate this plan.
Wow.
Here's how we push forward the revolution. We push it forward by freeing the libido, freeing women from the consequences of that libido by limiting birth.
Now, wait, Dr. Grant. She was advised quite clearly by Havelock Ellis to literally tone down her revolutionary sounding themes, because here's where she's in England, because she was talking too much about anarchism and communism.
Right.
Little not so popular.
Right.
And Havelock Ellis coached Sanger to focus on the more scientific sounding themes.
Yeah, one of the things
of
that
eugenics
one
and
of the
birth
things
control.
that we see with Sanger is she is a quick learner, and she is politically astute. She measured what she would say. And by the way, she was involved in very promiscuous relationships.
So she begins an affair, actually, with Havelock Ellis. He writes in his letters about his sexual experiences in bed with Sanger, forces his wife to read them, and Havelock Ellis drives his wife insane.
Yeah. He actually, as you mentioned before, they would oftentimes have orgies in their home, and he forced his wife to watch him as he had these entanglements with others, men and women.
So once again, we moved really fastly from the premise, man is an animal, to eugenics, to sexual chaos, to child sacrifice.
When she comes back to the U.S., she decides that it is time to really and truly take action, and that's when, in 1916, she founds the first birth control clinic in the Brownsville neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York.